Jeg trykker op til herovre. Yes.
So I have to answer in Danish, yes?
Yes, please. Please. We'll just translate you, dub you after.
All right.
When you meet someone, can you tell in advance what they might be a fan of from your huge catalog of books?
Well, especially here at like the Denmark Comic Con, they come walking up, and sometimes I just had somebody wearing an R2-D2 dress, and they were having a Yoda on the shoulder. Well, that's probably a Star Wars fan, yes? And I've seen people dressed up in some Dune costumes or X-Files costumes, but you know, a lot of times they're not just a fan of one thing, that they'll read my Star Wars books and my Dune books, and they'll read some solo books. And, you know, I myself am a fan. I grew up as a kid being a fan. I watched Star Trek and I watched Star Wars in the cinema, and just like, to me, to be on the other side now where I'm actually writing the books and comics, it's like a fanboy's dream come true.
I totally understand that. It's amazing. And I've seen different numbers being mentioned. Do you know how yourself how exactly how many books you have written?
No. Well, I mean, my count is something about 190, but I'm still writing, and sometimes gets published, and then sometimes they like gather 3 books together in an omnibus, and it gets difficult to count exactly. And like the specific number is a lot.
Yeah, a lot.
A lot of books.
It's very impressive. If we go back to the beginning, what drew you to the written word?
Well, I wanted to tell stories, and I was so inspired by the TV shows and movies and comics that I wanted to tell the stories. And I knew I wanted to be a storyteller before I knew how to write words. I was drawing pictures and just telling stories out loud. And then I learned how to write, and I wrote my first novel when I was 8 years old, when I was like on my father's typewriter, just typing out an adventure story. And it's just, I've never stopped. I've always wanted to be a writer. That never had any question in my head.
Amazing. So 8 years old, what's that story about?
It's funny because I found it, and I just published it in a collection of my short stories as sort of an introduction. And it was about a mad scientist who invents an injection that will bring anything to life. And the other scientists don't believe him, and so he gets his revenge, and he goes to the museum and brings a bunch of dinosaur bones to life, and he goes to the wax museum and he brings some of the wax monsters to life, and they just go and attack the city. So that was my novel when I was 8 years old.
Sounds fun. Sounds fun. So several of your books has become bestsellers around the world. When did you know that you made it as an author? Was there a particular book or release or a moment that you remember that?
Well, I live in the United States, and I live in a place called Colorado, which is up in the mountains, in the Rocky Mountains. And I climb mountains a lot. And when you climb mountains, it's a metaphor that you climb to like this summit, and I finally got to the top, and then you look and there's a bigger one behind it. And then you climb to that one, and then you get to the top and you realize, oh, there's another bigger mountain behind it. And that's kind of like the way of, do you know you've made it as a writer? That's like, I got my first book published, and then I got my first 3 books published, and then I got my first bestseller, and then I won my first award. I'm always challenging myself and writing new things, and I don't want to just write the same thing all the time. So now I'm writing comics, and I'm starting to get into writing some scripts, and I'm doing a lot of still novels and everything. I love writing, and it keeps me interested. I'm certainly not bored.
Amazing, and very, very exciting to explore different styles of writing. Over time, you have created your own original material and also written within established franchises.
Yes.
What is more intimidating, starting from entirely nothing from scratch, or joining a long-running franchise with existing constraints?
Well, I love doing both of them, and they're two different skill sets. Like if it's one of my big series is the Saga of Seven Suns. It's a huge space opera, kind of like The Expanse or Dune in Star Wars. And so I have to create everything, all the worlds and all the planets and all the governments and all the alien races and everything. But I can do whatever I want. I can make it all up. But I have to teach the reader, who's going to start from page 1, and they have to learn a whole universe. But when I'm writing a Star Wars book, I can say Han Solo is in the Millennium Falcon, and you know who it is and where he's going. However, when you're working on something as complex as, say, Star Wars, where I had it easy because when I was writing, there were only the 3 movies and not much of anything else. But now there are like hundreds of books and all the movies and all the TV shows. If you get something wrong, there will be some fan who finds out that you did it wrong, and you will get a letter about it. So you have to make sure that every detail works just right. And there are joys and satisfaction in doing both different things. And I still do both things. I like it.
Yeah, I understand. And have you experienced this with fans writing you letters about something they think is not in the right order?
Oh, I've got some that they will complain, and oftentimes I will go, but no, I'm correct, and I will show them the proof from this other episode or something like that. And the interesting thing is, I've done a little bit of Star Trek, but not that much. But if you're a Star Trek fan, you know that they're not accurate. Like this one episode contradicts another episode, and there's all kinds of inconsistencies all the way through. Dune, there are some inconsistencies even in the Frank Herbert books, but the fans don't see those. They refuse to see those. But you try to get as accurate as possible. And the thing is, even if you watch the news today or read the newspaper, you're not necessarily getting the accurate story no matter what. So
that's a good point.
Yes. Just enjoy the story.
Yeah. And could you talk about a little bit about the creative freedom within a franchise like Star Wars? How much creative freedom do you have?
Well, a lot of, whether it's X-Files, Star Wars, I've worked in Batman and Superman and things. But let's use Batman and Superman, for example. Like, there are so many different variations of Batman and Superman that nobody's going to say, you have to do exactly this because it has to match issue number 392. In comics, they're kind of open to having different universes and different versions of Batman and different storylines. In Dune, there's only one storyline. There's only Brian Herbert and I, and of course, before that, Frank Herbert. So we are the ones who wrote them all. In the X-Files, there's a real challenge in the X-Files because I was writing my novels while they were making new episodes every week. And I would work, of course it takes longer to write a novel than it would to do a weekly episode. And I'd be working along on a novel, and then I'd watch an episode and go, you just contradicted what I'm writing, and then I have to go back and change. A very specific example, and you're an X-Files podcast, right? So that they're going to be fans. Well, my third book, which is called Antibodies, and what is it in Danish?
Antistoffer.
Okay. So I'm writing this, and this was, I think, season 5 or something like that was when I was writing it. And they told me, that was at the time, Scully had adopted a dog named Queequeg. Scully has a dog, so Kevin, make sure that Scully has a dog. So I'm writing this whole book that she has a dog named Queequeg, and I had to, when they're off doing something, she had to find somebody to take care of the dog. And so the dog was throughout my entire book. And as I'm finishing the last chapters, I watched the episode where a giant alligator eats the dog, and I went, but you told me to put the dog in. So then I had to go take the dog back out all the way through the book. I wish they had told me they planned on eating the dog. So,
that's a fun fact. As you know, I'm a huge X-Files fan myself, and I think your novels really captures the tone of the franchise perfectly, and still having their own distinct voice. Could you talk a little about your approach to writing Mulder and Scully?
Well, the way I did it is that now at the time, the 1013 Studios had just sent me this huge box of VHS videotapes that they themselves copied the episodes onto the tapes and mailed them to me. This was before DVDs, when you could just get a copy of the season. So I got these before anybody. In fact, I even got a couple of episodes before they had aired. And specifically, there's an episode called Fire, and I'm watching the show, episode Fire, and all the action's happening, and then it would just go blank, and it said insert special effects here. And so they weren't even finished, but I was watching them. But I believe when I'm writing in somebody else's universe with characters, it's like total immersion. I watch the shows all day long, over and over again, and I pay attention to how Mulder talks and how Scully talks, and you have to get these little tiny details, like what is Mulder's apartment number, and how does Scully take her coffee, and because if you get that wrong, somebody will write you a letter. So you pay very close attention, and you really get to understand the way their dialogue works and how they talk, and we had one little challenge because when I was writing, I think Ground Zero, my first one, that I had Mulder making these sarcastic comments all the way through, and the editor said, well, take all these out because Mulder's not funny. And I said, yes, Mulder's funny, watch the show. And I had to prove to them that Mulder does make sarcastic comments in the movie. So.
Yeah. Wow. So, as a fan, we really appreciate that you're going to the links with details and stuff like that. I even think in Ground Zero that you references fire, that Mulder is afraid of fire or something like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, just even the little details that come through from one episode to the next. And X-Files was really pretty consistent all the way through. They didn't mess a lot of things up. And my books were all written before the later seasons, when it got so focused on the Uber story and the conspiracy and everything else. I kind of liked just the Monster of the Week episodes and
me as well. What was the dialogue like between you and Chris Carter and the whole X-Files team? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So I went down to their studios in Hollywood, and I sat and I met with them. And it turns out that Chris Carter, there had been a couple of other X-Files books written before mine. And Chris Carter was looking for a different writer. And he read my Star Wars books, and he said, this guy knows how to capture something. I want him to write the X-Files books. And so they contacted me and said, Kevin, do you like the X-Files? And I was watching it every week, so I said yes. And so I went down to meet with Chris Carter, and I was trying to pitch some ideas of, okay, I could do this story or that story. And a really interesting thing that he taught me, and I'll never forget this. So Chris Carter, when I was asking what kind of story should I write for X-Files, he said, Kevin, when you're writing a book, you have an unlimited special effects budget, and you should make a story that's way too big for us ever to do as a TV episode. And I never forgot that, because yes, I can put my words down, and I don't have to worry about how they can do it with computer animation or something. It just is in my imagination.
So you use A-bombs and you take them to the jungle and stuff like that?
Yes. Well, and for ruins, which is alien spacecraft in the Mayan temple ruins. So I live up in the mountains in the U.S. I've never been to those jungles. So I wrote my draft, and this was in a very, very tight deadline. I had to write the whole book in like 6 weeks. And I wrote the draft of the book by just watching, some National Geographic specials and doing research. But that just wasn't good enough. So my wife and I took a trip down to Cancun in the Yucatan, so I could actually go out to the Mayan temple ruins and I could be there. But I had my draft written, and I'm out there in these jungles, and I'm like, oh man, did I get all these details wrong? And I'm writing it. I mean, my imagination of the jungles was like from some old Tarzan movie where they're walking through the jungles. Well, if you look at those South American jungles, you can't walk through. I mean, it's a wall. You can't walk through it at all. And I went, that kind of removes the chase scene through the jungle that you can't do. And I had to rewrite everything, and I remember I'm on the bus to Chichen Itza, which is one of the famous Mayan temple ruins, and I've got the manuscript printed out, and I'm like writing like crazy, adding details and putting things into it. And I had one book signing where a fan came up to me, this big, huge, muscular soldier, U.S. Marine, and he comes up to me and he looked very intense, and he just said, "You were actually in those jungles, weren't you?" And I said, "Yeah, we went down to the jungles." He said, "Yeah, because I fought in Vietnam, and I was in those jungles, and nobody ever gets the jungles right, and you got the jungles right." So, good. That was a good compliment.
I must say, and I love the dedication to really get this right. So could you talk a bit about why were they in a hurry to? You only had 6 weeks, because So here's the crazy thing. So before I write a book, I have to write like an outline to say, here's chapter, this is how I'm going to write the book, because they need to approve it to make sure that it doesn't contradict everything. Well, I had written up the whole outline for Ruins and sent it in, and the publisher had the book scheduled. It was going to come out as their lead book in whatever month it came out. And they supposedly had plenty of time, but the X-Files people, Chris Carter and Frank Spotnitz, they had to approve everything. Well, but they were busy doing their shows, and this wasn't the priority, so they were rather late approving it. And by the time they finally said, "Yes, this is great," I went, "Thanks, but now I have 6 weeks to write the book," because the publisher was already had the cover done, and they were advertising it, and the bookstores were ordering copies, so we had to get this done, which meant I'm the one that had to do all the extra work, but we did it. That's my job. Yeah, and you did it very well. They have to approve everything to some extent. Can you remember something that they did not approve that you wanted to include, but they said you cannot include this?
Well, in my third book, Antibodies, I had several chapters where I had the lone gunman in there, because I liked the lone gunman. I was putting them all in through at it. But at the time, remember they were doing a spin-off show of the lone gunman, and they were just starting to work on that. And they said, "Kevin, we don't want the lone gunman in your book." And I said, "But you approved it. They were all in there." "Yeah, but we changed our minds." So I had to go and take out the lone gunman storyline from that book.
Oh, I see. As if I remember correctly, they are in ruins.
They're in ruins, but there were got a whole storyline in Antibodies, and I think I had to take that one out.
Oh, I see. And you also references some specific X-Files mythology things, like in Antibodies you include a chapter with the cigarette smoking man. Even though you can't really say he's the cigarette smoking man, we all, as a fans, know.
It was pretty clear who it was.
Yes. How challenging was it to get allowed to include him? Because I think when I read Ruins, there are some hints that he is in the background, but in Antibodies you can include him.
Right.
Can you remember any struggles about that?
I mean, the cigarette smoking man is so important. He's got to be in there, and so I put him in where I could. So what I tried to do is, I've watched all the episodes, and when I'm writing my book, I want to go, what does the X-Files fan want to read in this book? And you want to make sure that you put a little, they want this, and they want this, and they want this. And so I made sure that I put it in there, and of course, you have to have cigarette smoking man, right?
Yeah.
I can't remember if I put Rat Boy Krychek in there or not. I can't.
No, I don't think so.
I can't remember.
Unfortunately, no. But one of the other characters, Lens, could be as sort of a substitute for Krychek. I see. Do you have a favorite among the 3 books?
Well, the Ground Zero, which is atomic bomb ghosts, and I worked in the nuclear weapons industry at the U.S. I was a tech writer I had a top secret security clearance, and I worked with at the Manhattan Project laboratories and all that. So the research that I had done I thought that was very interesting to me. But of course, for Ruins, I got to go down to Cancun and the Yucatan and explore everything, and I got to climb those Mayan temple ruins. So, they're both great. Of course, I like Antibodies too because I like monster stories, and there's a good monster.
Totally.
I wish they had let me write a whole bunch more X-Files books.
Yeah. Was there a reason for that?
Well, they wanted to do a lot more, but like I said, they took so long to approve things, and the time that I was writing these books, that was when X-Files was the #1 in the world. That was the biggest ever. And frankly, they don't make as much money off of books as they make from like coffee cups. And I think they were just so overloaded that it was a lot more work for them to approve all the outlines and everything. So I think it just was not as much priority. But I mean, I wrote those 3, and then I believe another person wrote another book after that, but it took 3 years for that one to come out. And by the time they might have gotten around to doing more books, the popularity had gone away that the publisher didn't want to do it anymore. So.
Oh, I see. Did you have an outline for a 4th book?
Oh, I had like 10 other ideas that I could do things, and in fact, I had an idea that I thought was really, really good, but then it turned out that I wasn't going to do a 4th book, and so I wrote it as my own book, and I thought it was one of my very, very best ideas, and I published it as a novel called Steak, like pounding a steak through a. So the story is a man who believes in vampires, and he sees like night watchmen and midnight clerks and stuff, and he goes, you never see them during the daytime, so they must be vampires, and so he kills them. So he's a serial killer pounding stakes through people's hearts because he believes in vampires. And of course Mulder sees this and they go, there must be vampires, but he's just a crazy guy. And so I took that idea and wrote it as my own book because it was not going to be an X-Files book.
Sounds very interesting.
So now your fans can go and find Steak. And
I will find it myself as well. And I have a little theory, and keep with me here, about Ruins and Antibodies. I read them as interesting counterpartners because Ruins tap into Mulder's backstory with the sister a little bit, and although it's also exploring this alien mystery, ancient alien mystery. Whereas Antibodies tap into Scully's history with the cancer and centers on a mystery based in science. So, and both books starts with a climax in Ruins. It starts in Ruins and ends in a climax in Ruins. Was there a deliberate choice to like use them as a Mulder book and a Scully book and focus on the different sides?
I'm not sure that was conscious, but the previous one I had focused on the Mulder stuff. So the next book I wanted to do more Scully, and there was just so many different things. In fact, when it was really, really popular, and I've written a lot of young adult books too. My wife and I did the Young Jedi Knight series for Star Wars, and I really was pitching for them. I wanted to do a young Mulder series where he's trying to search for his sister, but he solves other mysteries and things at the time, and they just didn't want to do a young adult series.
That would have been amazing.
I would have loved young Mulder looking for his sister and believing in aliens and stuff.
Yeah. I think later on they published a couple of novels with young Mulder and young Scully, actually. I have not read them.
No.
So you actually returned to the X-Files universe in 2015.
Yes.
And you wrote a short story called Statues. Can you talk to me a little bit about that and how was it to return to this universe?
So, I wrote Statues. So here's a problem with the X-Files was that they became legendary because it took them so long to approve anything. When you wrote something, it would disappear for months and months. And I had written a bunch of comics. I did the Ground Zero comics, and I did a 2-issue one called Family Portrait, which is like an incubus in a jar that was in an old photographer's shop, and so they did that as a 2-issue comic series. And then I wrote another 2-issue comic series called Statues, where people are out in the desert and they drink this kind of water that turns them to stone, like fossils. And I had written 2 issues of this comic series, and X-Files people approved that comic series, but then they canceled the comics line. And so it never got done as a comic. And then later on, a friend of mine, Jonathan Mayberry, was doing this X-Files anthology of new stories. And so all these writers had to pitch their stories, and again, it was difficult to get anything approved because it took so long. And he asked me to write a story, and I said, I've already got a story, and it's already been approved. And so I took my comic scripts that were statues, and then I converted that same story into the novelette that's called Statues.
Oh.
So I finally got it published.
Yeah, and how long ago was it that you got the approval on the statues in the first place?
I think it was 10 years apart.
Oh, interesting. And yeah, and you finally get it published. It's a very exciting little story.
I mean, I liked the story, and it was so sad that I could never see it done as the comics.
Yeah. Could you talk a little bit about working with X-Files comics, as you talked about Ground Zero, and what was that like?
Well, we had a challenge at one point. So Ground Zero was in 4 comic issues, and it was the adaptation of my novel into 4 issues. Well, a novel's a whole lot longer than 4 comic issues, but you can do a lot with just a couple of panels in a comic that you might have to take pages to describe. So I was able to work on that. But so I've written Star Wars comics and Dune comics, and as you can imagine, Star Wars is very visual. There's a big planet and spaceships and things. X-Files isn't really all that visual. It's like creepy and suspenseful and shadows and things. So there's not as much action going on a comic page. And so you have to create this creepy mood. But the biggest challenge that we had is there was a point when I was doing these comics that David Duchovny and Gillian Anderson were having an argument with with Fox and their contracts. And so there was a point where nobody was allowed to use their likenesses. And so I had to write 1 or 2 issues of the comics that we were not allowed to show Mulder and Scully's faces at all in an entire comic about Mulder and Scully. So that was quite a challenge to do a comic strip where I only showed them in shadows, or only showed them from behind, or only showed like from their shoulders down, and it was a little silly, I thought, but you know, it's a challenge, and we did it.
Yeah. Could you? When I think about today, the X-Files is in a weird place because have you followed the series and when
I watched
like
the new reboot, and it was very striking that our culture has changed so much that when original X-Files was on, it was really cool to see conspiracy theories and like aircraft contrails and chemical traces and all these weird things going on. And when I watched the reboot of it, I am so sick of conspiracy theories and social media and COVID hoaxes and all. I just went, this isn't fun anymore. It was I'm not saying the show was bad. It's just it's a different time, and we used to like thinking maybe there's Bigfoot or maybe there's UFOs, and now you just watch on Facebook or X, and it's just like these non-stop crazy ideas, and it's disturbing. So X-Files feels almost innocent in how optimistic it was about the conspiracies. So
yeah. So you could not see yourself write a new X-Files story today, or
well, I don't know that anybody's doing them, but I would come up. I'd find a monster of the week that they could come. I mean, I had one of the other ideas that I had. Remember Toombs, the stretchy guy that ate livers. And that he established that Toombs like hibernates for 5 years or
30 years.
30
years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to do another Toombs story, and I met the actor. We were at an X-Files convention, and I kind of pitched him. I said, "I don't want to do a Toombs story." He said, "Yeah, do another Toombs story." I've got a folder somewhere with all these outline ideas, and so say like a Toombs story. That would still be relevant today.
Yeah.
In fact, it's been almost 30 years, hasn't it? So
it would be very relevant.
there's always possibilities.
Yeah, there were actually X-Files novel released last year. They released a new X-Files novel, so they are still exploring. I think it's because Disney bought Fox, So they have this property now, and I think they're trying to find out what to do with it.
Well, the problem is, for me to write it now, I'd have to spend how many months of work just rewatching everything and going through it, and I'm a little busy with the Dune movies and TV shows and things too.
I understand. Do you have a favorite X-Files episode?
Yeah, I love the one with the, I forget what it's called, the carnival freaks in Florida and the
Humbug.
I like that one.
Yeah,
That's my favorite.
That's a very good episode. Besides the podcast,
the Fluke Man. I like the
Fluke Man is
one too.
the host. Yeah, he's a nice monster.
Yes.
Very cool.